In the name of the God who loves us all. Amen. In today's gospel, we get another one of those great metaphors that Jesus was known to say from time to time. I am the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Today it's, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. One of the hardest things about metaphors is that they're never about what the words actually say. Metaphors require looking past the actual words and thinking about what they're pointing towards. They're grounded in a common understanding of something that is accessible to lots of people, like bread. But they point to something a lot more complicated. Bread is a pretty familiar thing for all of us, right? There are a lot of ways that our world is different from the world that Jesus lived in, but bread's not one of them. Bread is a shared cultural experience, and while the kind of bread might change based on different geographies and cultures, the concept of bread doesn't change. So what does bread make you think of? Close your eyes for a moment and picture your perfect experience of bread. Is it a nice, warm, homemade loaf straight from the oven with a nice pat of butter? Is it that delicious cornmeal muffin sitting on the side of your dinner plate? Is it the thick, crusty bread that you get in a restaurant with oil for dipping? A crumbly muffin bursting with blueberries, a tender, flaky croissant that you got on vacation, a nice, thick slice of chocolate cake? Yeah, that's making me hungry too. Sorry about that. None of us are having a hard time imagining bread, right? Whether you like your bread white, wheat, or gluten-free, we can all appreciate that bread has a huge role on our plates. It might look like naan or tortillas or crackers or pancakes. Bread is infinitely customizable, but also completely universal. And Jesus is counting on this when he starts talking about bread. He knows that the people will immediately understand the importance of bread. Now, the people that Jesus is talking to, they're kind of having a hard time with his overall message, because you can tell from the remarks that they're making that they knew Jesus when he was a kid. Who does Jesus think he is, claiming he's coming down from heaven? We know Jesus. He's Joseph and Mary's boy. He's not from heaven. They're having a hard time with believing a word that he is saying because their knowledge of Jesus is so firmly rooted in his human experience. And that's actually another way that we can interpret Jesus' bread metaphor. What is bread? We don't find it growing on trees like fruit. We don't find it in the fields like grain. We don't catch it out in the wild like fish or birds. Bread isn't something that is found in nature. Bread isn't something that God has provided as a part of creation. Bread is something that we create with God. God gives us grain to make flour, salt to make flavor, yeast to make rise, all of the components to create the most simple bread are elements that God has given to us in creation. But it takes our action, the intentional work of humans, to create bread. Bread isn't just another one of God's gifts. Bread is a way that we can co-create with God. We are created in the image of a creative God, and making bread is a clear example of how that can be. An example that is so important that Jesus, who is both God and man, calls himself bread, a partnership between God and God's people. So why would it be so important for Jesus to use this particular image, the image of bread, as he's explaining who he is and why his Father has sent him? Think back on all of those examples of bread that I mentioned a moment ago. I saw a lot of people smiling as I mentioned each example. Is the reason you were all smiling because you know that eating bread will make you less hungry? Maybe. But I think the reason that we all react the way that we do is because bread means something more than a meal. And that's what Jesus is trying to say to the people. Bread is about more than just feeding a hungry belly. It's about a greater kind of sustenance. When you think about a specific bread, you think about the experience around that bread. You think about the way that your grandmother's kitchen smelled when there were rolls in the oven. You think about the friends that you shared a meal with, breaking bread together. You think about the joy that you have when you're baking with someone. Bread is about more than food. Bread is about community. So when Jesus is saying that he's the bread of life, he's not saying that he's going to fill everyone's bellies, which is what the people think he's saying. They think that the miracles that Jesus has been performing have been about proof in some sort of way. They're trying to make Jesus' work be about a material thing, about being fulfilled in a tangible, earthly way. But Jesus is pointing to a bigger picture. When Jesus says that he's the bread of life, he's pointing to those shared community experiences and the intangible fulfillment that we get from being together as community. He's less concerned with the warm bread and more concerned with the warm feelings you get from sharing bread. He's pointing towards a bigger sense of community. He's pointing towards the way that we work with God to create that community. He's pointing towards co-creating something new along with God. He's pointing towards loving God and loving our neighbors. When we really think about how we can live into Christ's command to love each other, one of the first things that we must do is to get to know one another, to listen to each other so that we can appreciate each other's experiences and circumstances, just like Jesus did throughout all of the traveling that he did with the disciples. And it's when we get close to each other, when we acknowledge the power in proximity, that we can truly start to love one another. And one of the most important ways that we do that as the church is through our service with those experiencing poverty and oppression. As Brian Stevenson says, we have to get proximate in order to understand how to help those who live in the margins. We must find ways to engage and invest and position ourselves in places where there is despair. By spending time with people whose life experiences are different than our own, we not only gain empathy for their struggles, but we learn to see their strengths and the gifts that they bring to the table. We can learn how to best help communities rather than assuming that we already know what's best. And through our experiences of getting proximate, of getting to know each other, of loving each other, our faith grows infinitely more than it could through any action we might attempt on our own. At the Episcopal Community Foundation for Middle and North Georgia, we fund ministries which are seeking to get proximate with their local communities. We work with the parishes in our diocese to identify how we can come together and give people the opportunity that they need to move into a place of self-sufficiency and sustainability. Just as Jesus and the disciples had to get proximate with people throughout all of their travels, to break bread with people across the communities that our parishes serve need us to get proximate with our outreach ministry. And ECF's role is to provide grant funding to our parishes and their nonprofit partners which increases capacity for this ministry. As you know, your community here at St. Luke's engages in this kind of work often. We have been honored to partner with y'all several times in recent years to create a deeper impact in the community that you serve. With grants to the Boyce Ansley School, Church of the Common Ground, and Crossroads Community Ministries, ECF has recently granted collectively $90,000 for St. Luke's community partnerships, more funding than any other parish in our diocese has received. Both the people that you serve and the St. Luke's volunteers are able to experience spiritual growth through the proximity that comes through service and the relationships that are built. The work that y'all are doing is a prime example of how ECF's funding, which comes from parishioners like you from across the diocese, can be utilized for definitive action in our outreach ministries. The ministry of presence, of proximity, is how we are able to learn from each other and love each other, how we can be a part of real transformation in our communities. And through ECF's partnership with our parishes, we're funding opportunities for this kind of proximity across the diocese. Unlike other ministries in our diocese, ECF's work is not supported by each parish's tithe to the diocese. Instead, the funds that ECF distributes through our grant-making programs have been contributed by Episcopalians like you over the last 40 years, primarily through legacy gifts. During adult formation, I had the opportunity to share a bit about how ECF partners with our parishes, not only through grant funding, but also by providing fundraising and administrative support so that parishioners can ensure that the church and ECF can continue this work through legacy giving with opportunities like including the church in your will or making contributions from your IRA. I'd love to meet with each of you about the legacy that you would like to leave for your church. So please come and see me after the service and we can arrange a time to meet. Providing the long-term financial sustainability for this outreach work is a part of our role as the church. We are so grateful to the generations of Episcopalians who have laid the foundation for us to engage in outreach and to love each other as Christ loves us. It's now our turn to roll up our sleeves and get proximate, both through our own direct service with those in need and through ensuring that there will be the financial support for this work to continue in the future. When you think about the people who are in your life, the ministries that you are a part of, the community that you live in, how might you be called to get proximate and love others? How are you being called to break bread with your community? How are you being called to work with God to create community today? Amen.